Hello and welcome to a brand new show. Starting today, next half an hour with me, Nikunj Dalmia. Markets and macro. It's all about you and me, or it's all about us. When I say you, well, we will be taking viewer questions. Us, because the idea is very simple. We want all of us and India and Indians to succeed when it comes to the journey of wealth creation. India is rising. Are you rising with it? The channel logo of your favorite channel, ET Now. And that's the essence of your show. We'll interact, we'll answer queries, we'll make it more personalized, we'll talk about trends, and we'll talk about macros. So keep it simple, markets and macro, it's about you and me. Keep our queries going, keep your questions coming, we'll encourage them on the show. Even though the name of the show is Markets and Macro, today we are starting a show remembering an extraordinary gentleman. If a pantheon of great investors is ever to be made, one name will always find itself on the pedestal. That's Charlie Munger. World will remember him as a great investor, but those who've studied his life, followed him over the years, understood his philosophy. Charlie was just not an investor. Of course, he was a capitalist by mind, but he was a true gentleman at heart. It is so simple. You spend less than you earn. Invest shrewdly. Avoid toxic people and toxic activities and try and keep learning at all age of your life. And if you do all these things, you're almost certain to succeed. And if you don't, you're going to need a lot of luck. And that's what Charlie did. He believed in keeping simple. Simple ideology, simple approach, no benchmarks, no comparison, a happy state of mind, and grit which was extraordinary. For a man who was broke in his 30s, for a man who lost his one eye when he was in 30s, for a man who had to bury his son, history is remembering him as one of the greatest human beings. Many call him as the right hand of Warren Buffett, someone who influenced Buffett a lot, the greatest investor on the earth. He told Buffett one simple thing, keep it simple. But instead of focusing on cigar butt investing, which you learned from Benjamin Graham, you need to focus on buying good companies at a reasonable price. And then try to be permanent owners. Because when you're buying a business, you're trying to buy, when you're investing in a stock, essentially you're buying a piece of business. And that's what Charlie always did. One of my favorite quotes is, and I think of you and have to learn and live through it. Charlie was a constant learning machine, always kept on learning, had always books where he went. Free time, busy time. Even if he had anything to talk about, it was always in his circle of competence. So while world remembers him as Warren Buffett's partner, but I think he should be remembered as a man with extraordinary foresight, a student of human philosophy, and an extraordinary gentleman when it comes to compassion and care for others. And my guest on the show today is someone who has called him the modern Rishi. In one of his talks at Flame University, Vallabh Bhanshali said that if you have to identify the modern Rishis of today's capitalist world, Charlie Munger would be right up there. Mr. Bhanshali, we've learned a lot from you, but you've always said that Charlie Munger has been one of your teachers. You've called him the modern Rishi. And that's how I think the world would like to remember him.
Absolutely. It's a day of sadness because he died 100 years too soon. But it's also a day of extreme gratitude for the impact that he has had on the world and personally on me. It seems that I took some early decisions in life which got vindicated or which got reinforced when I came in contact with Charlie Munger's thought and life. And for the last at least almost 35 years, he's been a constant source of inspiration, teaching, and practical decisions in life. I heard your comments about Charlie Munger, but many times, on a day like this, they sound like, people may not pay attention. They seem more emotion than rational. But he was the greatest rationalist of his our time. and someone whose life reflected all his teaching, which doesn't always happen. So he said learning means living, and he was an epitome of that. So you can't stop talking about Charlie Munger and his influence on my life, or almost all of us at NM.
Mr. Bhansali, one of his most prominent teachings was be prepared and keep it simple, something which you always alluded to in your life. If you don't understand a problem, invert it. Would you like to elaborate on these points which you often revert to, something which you learned from Mr. Munger?
So, we heard about he being a gentleman and how seriously they took promise. People often fail to understand that someone who have a tremendous track record of, producing a return on capital, they kept $100 to $150 billion of cash on their balance sheet. And people wouldn't believe it when they said that, look, if a flood occurs once in 100 years, they want to be prepared for it. So that's the seriousness with which they took their promise and this principle of being prepared. On a balance sheet of some $500 billion, keeping as much as $150, $60 billion cash, varying amounts, it would fluctuate. But that is it. But that happens when you want to keep it simple, you take a few principles in life and take them to extreme. And they said they did the same thing in the world of investment. If they found a simple idea, they kept investing in it, or they remained invested. I think one of the most famous bets which came later in life and which seemed against what they used to say, we don't understand technology, was their bet on Apple. And almost 25% of their portfolio today consists of Apple. They understood Apple, it was simple, and they kept investing. So even in the fluctuation that we saw in the last 2-3 years, their confidence never shook. So they were prepared about understanding, where this business is going. When Steve Jobs left, their confidence did not shake at all because they understood the business that well. So Munger Saab lived his life exactly as what he said in his various comments. And this alignment of, what you say and what you do, Buddha said, is the essence of being a great spiritual person, the person who eventually gets liberated. This alignment is so critical. So what you said, keep it simple. Apple was a very fine example. And then, remaining prepared all the time, irrespective of what happened. We saw in 2008 how prepared they were. When amongst the smartest companies in the world, Goldman Sachs was in trouble, all they needed was to place a phone call to Munger to Buffett Saab, and then he discussed with Munger. And the next day they had a deal sheet with someone as smart as Goldman Sachs, and how much money they made off Goldman Sachs. So they were always prepared. They waited for a simple idea. One idea which I think I must also express here is the thinking about simplicity. Munger Saab said that if I can jump over a 1-foot hurdle, why go over a 6 feet? More educated we are, we think we are smarter when we do complicated things. We complicate things to look smart. He worked the other way around. And there were few people as learned as Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. So, saying one thing, remembering him, and living it are quite different. They lived it, and I think all those people benefit immensely who try and live by those principles. Living by them is important.
It is difficult to live by principles of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. They are so simple. Buy a good company, buy when there is fear, don't look at the short term, think long term, and you will generate wealth. It's a very simple principle, yet a difficult one to follow. Why is it so difficult to implement, sir?
People don't want to work. People don't want to prepare themselves. These gentlemen said that the week in which they have no meetings and they can, read all 5 days is the most efficient day for them. So this is their commitment to being prepared. And they think we don't know enough anytime. One thing that, it is interesting and so inspiring. Munger Saab said, his insight was, they were mighty impressed by a book on incentives by C.L. Denny. And they said, oh, everything in the world is driven by incentives. To understand what incentives are working for people they deal with, Munger Sahab developed this concept of called mental model. That when an architect comes and looks at your house, he has a very different mental model in his mind. And when he proposes terms, or when he makes recommendations also, you do not understand them fully, and then you have disputes or unhappiness. So, happiness is not an accident for them. It was calculated. For that, he said, I must understand various mental models of different people and professions. And how many did he learn about? 500 of them. This is a rough number, but 500 of them. And he has talked about it. And one of his pupils has, followed him and learned about 250 of them. So this is the preparation. And people are not ready to do it. We study a little and we are in a great hurry to show off that, oh, I know this and I know that, and make opinions and give opinions. So I think that is the tough part, Nikunj, that people don't want to put in hard work. They were ready, they enjoyed, all their studies and all the preparation.
Mr. Bhanshali, Mr. Munger also insisted on not just reading about the world of investment. He spoke extensively about the need to understand psychology, philosophy, art, literature. Do you think it's a 360-degree approach which I think would differentiate an ordinary investor from an extraordinary investor now?
So this is the 500 mental models, so-called. And at Flame, we have introduced that program. How do I understand what the other person is saying unless I understand the mindset from which that person is acting or saying anything? This is a simple observation. And you come across it daily between men and women, parents and children, etc. But we don't want to do anything about it. And once you recognize that, then, every subject in the world is relevant to you, not only interesting, but relevant to you. And look at the other, where is this coming from? They didn't want to retain any investors' money and they wanted to give back all the money. But some investors continued to remain invested. And how seriously they took that responsibility right until the last day that Mr. Munger lived, and Mr. Buffett will continue to follow that principles. Out of that fiduciary relationship that these people trust us, they don't want to go away, we got to work very hard. And let me juxtapose this to make this point sharper. Mr. Munger was asked, what are your portfolio returns? He said, I don't compute. I have more money than I care, more money than I deserve. So whether, my portfolio is compounding at 5% or 7% or 15%, I have no competition. We all know his sharpness, so he would have the math. But his attitude towards it was this. He said, if we are working this hard, whether it was Daily Journal or Westco or at Berkshire, it was their sense of fiduciary, that, we got to do the best for our people. So can you imagine these two great men working hard till the last day of their, Mr. Munger up to the last day, 10 days back he gave this interview and, we can see sharpness, etc. Out of that sense of fiduciary. Where do you find such people? So when you have, it is not easy for people because they don't pause and reflect. When you become a trustee, you become better. People don't want to be trusted. And the rewards of a trustee are that you become so good at what you're doing. These people are fine examples of that trusteeship. And the second thing, maybe, is how compounding happens out of this. I have a painting which is rather famous now in the world, where I say that compounding is everything. Yes. And it's not as difficult as one may think. Mr. Munger thought about compounding, I think, to an extreme level. So when he says, I keep it simple, invest in a good company, how many levels of compounding he thought of? And he said that, look, a good company cannot be a good company unless it knows how to deal with suppliers, how to deal with customers, how to deal with employees, how to deal with regulators. And they will build trust with all of that. And that trust reduces the cost of their relationship in their supplies, in what they buy, what they sell, in the employee relationship, etc., etc., etc. It's compounding at various levels. People have petty minds. For small things, they break a relationship. And the fact that these two people remained friends, lived in modest houses, it was all that simplicity as a great, great compounder. You don't take decisions on what clothes I wear, what cars I use, what house I live in, what office I work out of. It just didn't bother them at all. This is the idea taken to the limit. So I think studying Mr. Munger's life should be made mandatory in our schools and colleges. And as you mature, you need to study this as you're developing your maturity. You have to read it again and again and again.
Well, such a pleasure to have you, Mr. Bhanshali, on ET now today and talk about the modern Rishi, as you have called Mr. Munger. I must, share it with our viewers that Mr. Munger has influenced everyone's thinking, but Vallabh Bhanshali is someone who has certainly influenced a lot of thinking for me and for a lot of our viewers with the simplicity with which he has always conveyed the message of simplicity, spirituality, and compounding. So thank you very much, Mr. Bhanshali. Today we are remembering, the guru of all, Mr. Munger, but on my screen is also one of the gurus, Mr. Bhanshali, whom I have learned a lot from. So thank you very much.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, my next two guests on the show today, Nilesh Shah and Gautam Baid. You'll not believe it, actually, I've never interacted with Gautam on this forum. I've been inviting him, he's never accepted my invitation. Nilesh Shah, well, we've been friends for years. And I think Nilesh has this page in a diary where he has got an autograph of Munger, Bill Gates and Buffett. Am I right? You are carrying it with you. Want to show it to our viewers?
Bang on, Nikunj. Brilliant. I mean, I was really very, very fortunate. This was way back, probably in 2006, my first visits.
6 or 7?
I think this was 2006.
Okay, I remember it wrong. Memory getting old now.
Yes. And this was when, we as international visitors to the AGM were very privileged to basically kind of go across and meet this, the world's most amazing troika of Buffett, Munger, and Gates. And we were so lucky to kind of have their autographs as well. And that's pretty much a treasure. And it's something which I cherish, very fond memories, not just in terms of what I learned from them, but even to have this masterpiece from them. So consider myself truly lucky and fortunate to have that.
You've been going to the AGMs and you've put a stall, I think 3 years ago when you launched your first book. So have you had a chance to meet Mr. Munger? Have you had a chance to shake hands with both Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, Gautam?
Well, Nikunj, thank you for having me on your show. I did have the good fortune of meeting Mr. Munger in a public setting at the 2018 Daily Journal Corporation annual meeting in California. And I've always been very influenced by him for many years now. And I cannot thank him enough for changing our lives for the better. Because above all, what Charlie Munger has done is he has taught all of us to live an honorable life with full integrity. Apart from the investing lessons, of course, I think his life lessons are very endearing and will always hold us in very good stead.
Gautam, you're an author and you've come up with 2 bestsellers. How much of that bestseller is influenced by Munger? What are the things which you incorporated in your book from him?
Well, Nikunj, the very first quote of The Joys of Compounding is a quote by Munger, which goes like this: "The best thing a human being can do is to help another human being no more." And on the day of his demise, today, I urge all of the viewers to actually embrace this life principle. Let's try to help as many people as we can and endeavor to help at least one person every single day. And over time, over decades, what will happen is you will experience the power of compounding goodwill, like Mr. Munger has. By net worth, he may be far less than Warren Buffett, but in terms of goodwill, he's right up there with the legend. So I think compounding of goodwill over time requires this constant attitude of being a giver. And the second big learning from Mr. Munger over the years is that of embracing lifelong learning. He has very famously said that the game of life is the game of everlasting learning. And this is again, where the subtitle of my first book actually came from, The Passionate Pursuit of Lifelong Learning, because You may come from a very humble background. You may have very modest means, but if you embrace this attitude of constant learning every day, trying to wake up a bit wiser than when you were the previous day, over time you cannot help but become very successful. And I think this is the attitude all of us value investors across the world have embraced, and it always serves us very, very well.
Nilesh, Buffett says Berkshire Hathaway would have not been Berkshire Hathaway if Charlie would have not influenced my thinking when I was only a student of Benjamin Graham. I was focusing on cigar but investing. I was being told how to value companies differently. They always shied away from technology companies, but Berkshire Hathaway bought into IBM. Apple is the largest holding. So while some would say that your thought process should not change, here you've got two of the most famous investors who constantly evolve in terms of adapting to the new world. Nilesh?
Yeah, absolutely, Nikunj. To do this after spending decades on investing, and towards the fag end to start basically backing something like Apple, I think is a remarkable change which they could essentially undergo. Obviously, the basic tenets still remain the same, that buy a wonderful business, and as long as it's managed by a set of ethical people, you should be fine to kind of be invested in that. So it's quite remarkable that after so many years, so many decades of investing, when you've by and large stayed away from technology companies, to kind of go and invest into an Apple and make that your biggest position, I think was quite remarkable, and that's probably is what makes them successful. And Nikunj, if you look at it, I think change is honestly been a constant for them, following the Benjamin Graham principle, which is the cigar butt style of approaching, and then to change it to what basically Munger nudged him or impressed upon him to shift more towards buying wonderful businesses at fair prices, and then eventually to go and buy into a technology business like Apple, and then in between buy a whole bunch of utility businesses, whether it was essentially the Santa Fe acquisition or owning some of those power distribution utilities, which may not necessarily be consumer or technology franchises, but probably they bought it more to kind of bring stability to their overall investment portfolio. Are kind of changes which they have probably made very constantly, and that's quite remarkable that on that kind of size and after so many years you're willing to change, willing to adapt. I probably think that's one of the secret weapons that they had for their success.
I've got exactly a minute before we wrap. So Gautam, if you have to put one quote plate of Charlie Munger on your wall, which would be that quote?
It would have to be the one which I just mentioned, that the game of life is the game of everlasting learning, because this is an attitude. See, the only way to survive and thrive in the markets in the long run is to be adaptive to change. So unless you're a learning machine, a term which Charlie Munger actually coined, you can never progress very ahead in life. So embrace a lifelong learning, embrace a feeling of gratitude, embrace the attitude of helping others and giving unconditionally, and you will live a very fulfilling and meaningful life.
Well, guys, I must say that I'm a bit jealous here because I never had a chance to meet Charlie, even though it's something that I wanted to do. But so nice to have you both on ET now and talk about the legacy of Charlie Munger. Vallabh Bhanshali called him the modern Rishi. The world would remember him as an extraordinary gentleman, but for all of us, he was a teacher who not only learnt, but always also kept guiding others. In moments of darkness, in moments of sadness, in moments of joy, and in moments of pain, whether it was COVID or 9/11 or 2008, he always kept it very simple. Keep it simple. And that's what I think Charlie would be remembering for. His wit, his one-liners, his simplicity, his assessment of risk, his understanding of human behavior, his never say never attitude of learning. For a man who was broke in his 20s, for a man who lost his son in his 30s, for a man who was divorced and had to fight medical challenges at 99, he has made an impact. It's a new show, Markets and More with Nikunj. Tomorrow, we'll be able to take some queries, but today the special was all about remembering the man himself, the great Charlie Munger.